Welcome to the School of Architecture. Welcome to our first evening lecture for 2018-19. Before we officially begin, I also want to announce in advance that our next lecture will be on Monday, October 8th. Ed Eigen, Harvard professor and author of the recent collection of essays on accident. Is this super loud? Sounds loud. For our first lecture, it's a real pleasure to be able to welcome back Chicago-based and internationally recognized architect Francisco Gonzalez Pulido. Just as we are continuing celebrating our 50th anniversary, Francisco just had the one-year anniversary of his own firm, FGP, FGP Atelier. And if you're wondering about the protocol about this, it's not too late. You can all still send anniversary presents to both of us. Just remember, ours is gold and Francisco's is paper. Okay? After graduating from the Tecnológico de Monterrey and then Harvard's GSD, Francisco joined Murphy-Yawn, where he practiced for 18 years, having become president of the renamed firm Yawn in 2012. As you can imagine, being Jan's first design partner, Francisco had an enormous and transformative effect on the work in that office. I recall going once, a little while back, on a research trip to Las Vegas, and at the time feeling the need to go see the then recently completed Libeskind Mall, which turned out to be a little underwhelming. But the trip was more than saved by looking slightly to the left of Libeskind and seeing these two great leaning towers, the Veer Towers, which at the time I didn't realize were Francisco's project with Murphy-Yawn. Since then, with both Yawn and FGP, Francisco has continued to inventively address a range of large-scale types around the globe, including the Doha Convention Center in Qatar, the Litop Plaza in Guangzhou, and the soon-to-be-completed baseball stadium for the Red Devils in Mexico City, which many of us in the school will appreciate as a glowing pitchfork logo in the landscape. As impressive as the scale of this built realization is, however, are Francisco's smaller and more conceptual projects, such as the Orchard Educational Pavilion, a floating light cube that was nominated for the MCHAP Prize last year, the incredibly detailed and at the same time very relaxed Casa M5, and the serially and continuously changing atmosphere of the Harmony Bridge in Guangzhou. Finally, there is Francisco's surprising and critical entry for the Guggenheim Helsinki competition, a swirling cocoon of wood collected from all the countries that do not, or at least do not yet, have artists represented in the Guggenheim collection. In addition to an incredible body of work for an architect still under 50, Francisco has taught at several universities in Mexico City and for a number of years at IIT. As many of you will recall, Francisco was one of the school's year-end jurors in May, where his comments were both supportive and challenging, all in the right ways. Besides his evident enthusiasm for architecture, what struck me was Francisco's generosity toward younger architects in training and his support for ideas, as he took the time also on that day, where he was here gratis, to buy 2 issues of fresh meat, the last 2 issues. So for that reason alone, I consider Francisco an honorary member of our team, the Orange Devils of the SOA. So please join me in welcoming FGP to UIC.
Thank you. Well, really, it's great to be here with you guys today. And I want to share a little bit of the history of my professional career. I started really kind of young. I was 21 years old when I decided to be an architect. And I was really, my first impulse was to start building things. And I spent 6 years in Mexico City. I was born in Mexico City, building projects for people that knew me and decided to trust me with their budgets, and it was an interesting time because I spent from 1991 to 1997 designing on a design build practice, mostly in Mexico City, At that time, Mexico was getting a little violent, and it was not the best time to be there. So in juxtaposition to that, there was a competition for a tall building in Mexico City, and I was lucky to be the winner. So it was an inflection point in my life. I was really thinking, should I stay in the city and do this building, or should I go abroad and learn new things? When they opened the envelopes of that competition and they realized that I was 27 years old and I had no office, they decided not to give me the building. So the decision was easy. So I fought it, but I couldn't get it, and I left Mexico a little bit with a heart broken, I have to say, because I thought this would have been a great thing to do. You know, it was a big building for Pricewaterhouse. It was a tower. You know, a tower in Mexico back then, 24 stories, was pretty significant. So I left and I enrolled at GSD, as Bob mentioned, and it was a great experience. It was a wonderful time. So when I finished that master's degree, I came to Chicago just because Helmut, at the time, he was actually developing an interesting partnership with two German engineers that I really respected and admired. Matthias Schuller, which is an energy scientist, and Werner Sobeck, the two of whom I continue to be friends, and we continue to collaborate even beyond the young time together. And I thought this sort of concept of collaborative design is what I wanted to do. I had always been very interested in technology. I think my work is really science-based. And I felt really that environment was really great for me. So I came to Chicago, and it was hard. The studio had a format that was very particular. I don't want to get into any details if you want after this, we can talk about it. But the first 6 years, it was more really working for Helmut. But at the same time, I kept doing competitions on my own. I would go out and look for work, and I would find something to do, and so I started bringing work to the company, which before me, nobody has really ever done. So 6 years after that, I started working there. I was kind of taking control of things, and mostly because I was designing and bringing work. And up to that point, Helmut was sort of the only one designing and directing the office. So as Bob mentioned, in 2009 I became president of the company, and then I decided to rename the company because I thought that this Murphy name didn't really mean anything to anyone anymore. You know, I would go to meetings and people would ask me if Murphy was coming. You know, I'm like, Murphy's dead. You know, don't expect him here. And at some point it really didn't have any relevance. So in that struggle, I decided to rename the firm Jan, you know, with the idea that the name would represent Helmut and myself. And so the last 6 years of my time there, I was really mostly in charge of the projects in the Middle East, in Asia, some of the European work, especially in Spain and Italy, because of my background, and of course Helmut would continue to work in the United States and in Germany. And I think this is part of the reason why none of my work was really well known in the States, because he would basically be the architect in charge, the principal in charge of the projects that we were doing in the United States. And the only exception was really Veer, the project that Bob mentioned. It was a phenomenal collaboration with Daniel Lieskin, Norman Foster, Vignoli. It was a fantastic time. Our client was very generous. So when the time came to really work out a transition, you know, I told him, well, there's only two options, right? I buy you out or you buy me out. That's it. There's no way that the two of us can fit in this company. And he said, okay, buy me out. Yeah, so we started working on this buyout, and obviously I'm here, so it didn't work. So what I'm going to show you is a little bit, you know, the work that, you know, some of the work that I did when I was there. Some of them is my authorship, some of them is in collaboration with Helmut, and obviously most of the presentation is going to be focused on the work of the studio. I founded the Atelier 1 year ago, and we were an unusual sort of studio at the time because when I left, and I have to say this and do the word on record, I was representing really 70% of the work of the company. So when we split, I told him, fine, I'm not going to buy you out, but I'm going to take my clients and my buildings with me. So we started with 5 souls in a WeWork space. We were kind of on top of each other. And we were working on 550,000 square meter buildings in China, you know, and at 320-meter tall tower in Guangzhou and a stadium in Mexico. And it was absolutely surreal, you know. So we were very, very young, very few, and very busy. So anyway, so the story starts here. You know, when I left Yan, I decided to go on a motorcycle trip. I'm a big fan of rock and roll and motorcycles. So I went, my plan was to go from Chicago to California, and this was me visiting the Lincoln Memorial, and I was in search of things like this, you know, because this is, after doing all the things that I've done and traveling the world 5 times a year and building the biggest buildings and blah, 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 I just couldn't find a lot of spirit in the things that we were doing in Yan. I wanted to do something that I felt more connected to, and that would be more about free and open space. And so the purpose of my trip was to find places that would make me feel this way. As I said, I was born in Mexico City. I think from Mexico City I learned my love for scale. It's a wild place. If you haven't been there, you have to go. Especially now, it's incredible. The culture of this place right now, the energy of Mexico City is amazing. But then what's interesting, I think, about the way I was raised is that my father, he just went crazy when I was 5 years old, and he decided to leave the city. He bought himself a ranch in the middle of nowhere in the north of Mexico, and he took me there. So I was raised really in a place like this. You know, I lived in a place like that since I was 6 years old until I was 11. My education was extremely poor because there was really not a formal school to attend, so I was really more like homeschooled. But it was an amazing time because obviously being around my dad, who was kind of a mad scientist, you know, he would always, I think from him comes my love for multidisciplinary teams and collaboration among engineers, because he would always create, put together a group of people to do something that he needed, you know, and in that region, there were not really a lot of resources. You had to do a lot of things yourself. This is me. I was 21 years old in this picture. This is the first house that I built. I was in a wedding. You shouldn't underestimate, you know, the power of networking in this profession. It's the most important thing that you can really do. Listen to me. I was in a wedding, and there was this crazy man sitting next to me who said, "What do you do?" I said, "Well, I'm trying to become an architect." And he said, "Well, I want to build myself a summer house in a remote location. Are you interested in the commission?" I said, "Of course I am. What have you done?" I said, "Nothing." He said, "Well, I don't know if this is a good idea, but maybe you can actually, you know, do some sketches for me and see." So this house really is not going to change the history of architecture by no means, but it changed my life, because obviously I moved there. As you can see, there was nothing around. The closest town was probably 200 miles. There was no water, no electricity, no road, nothing. So I was looking for men around the area. I built a crew of 20 men, and between me and them, literally, and when I say me, I was really bending steel and pouring concrete and building formwork, and we built this thing. It was around 5,000 square feet house in a very interesting area. I bet you the day that we found water underground was an absolute celebration. You know? So it was a great project. This is some of the work that probably you've seen that I did when I was with Helmut. This is IIT student housing. This is a competition that Helmut and I did, and maybe my most important contribution to this building were the courtyards. Helmut and I had a little bit of a struggle about that. He wanted to design like a train. And at some point I said, Helmut, this is really not urban, it's not connected to the campus, you know, we cannot just build a wall, I think we need to make this very porous. So I came up with this idea. And he said, well, you know, maybe we should present the 2 options to the board and see what they say. And you know, I think it's an interesting exercise. What I learned about this project about this exercise more than anything is how important budgets are for universities, obviously. And we had a very tight budget on this building. We had to include everything, you know, the furniture. And so we actually ended up designing a lot of the parts of this building, not only the building, but even the furniture and the signage and so on and so forth. This was my first building in China. This is when I started really looking for work. I went to China in 2005. Not a lot of firms were actually there, so I went there to do business development. I met with a lot of clients, and I found this client, they were really young and different, you know, their mentality, they were really interested in doing something different. simple, cleaner, you know, more sophisticated than a lot of the things that were getting built there. This Skidmore building was already under construction, and I won this tower. It's a 300-meter tall tower. It's an office building, but it's actually quite an amazing piece of technology. You know, the building is, I think, there's really nothing radical about it in terms of its architecture, but there's a lot of radical things in terms of the technology, you know, behind this building. It's a building that uses 30% less steel than most buildings around it, which I think was a great achievement. It was one of the first LEED certified buildings. Not that I'm a big believer of the system, don't get me wrong. I fight with them constantly, and I think this thing about points is, I know there's a lot of BS, but I mean, I think in that context was kind of relevant at the time, you know, building that cares. This is probably one of the first really advanced buildings that I did with Helmut in Germany, the corporate headquarters of the Deutsche Post. I've done airports, this is Bangkok, our first project in New York together, and this is Veer. This is a project that Bob was referring to in Las Vegas. You know this project. This is a project in Tokyo. It's a massive building, it's a big complex, but really one of the most significant elements is this canopy that is really sort of, a lot of it is based in the technology of sailboats. You know, we're using high performance membranes, and there's a lot of embedded structural elements in the membrane to achieve this flatness, you know, because the idea that I had for this canopy is that I didn't want a canopy that has all these curves. I wanted something that looks very linear, very clean, very flat. And so the collaboration with engineers and obviously with contractors is very important in our work. This is a convention center that Rob was referring to. And again, this is just a little preview of the work that I've done previously. Here's my dad, that's me in that ranch when we worked together at 6 years old. So again, what I say is, you know, I'm really interested in technology, and I think, you know, my work I think is very scientific. I care about precision in everything I do. I care about detailing things in a way that really makes sense. I love to work with contractors. I'm not a paper architect. When I came to the States, I was actually disappointed on how much the practices here are really focused on paper. And to me, that was really disappointing, because actually Mexico is very different. You know, we actually go out and build things, and here I was working with architects who have been with Helmut 25 years, and they haven't really built anything themselves. So for me, I don't see really architecture at the heart of what I do. I see science at the heart of what I do, and everything is around it. Some of the work that I currently have is in some of these locations, and some of the projects that I'm going to show you today that are really of my authorship and we continue working on is that stadium in Mexico City. There's a nanotechnology building for Monterey Tech. There is a tower in Guangzhou which won a competition too. We continue working on the Shanghai Financial Center. It's a project that I continue doing in collaboration with Helmut. I finished this headquarters for Land Rover, which turned out to be really an interesting building. So I'm going to show you some of that stuff and some of these competitions. This is a very interesting exercise. I like to start kind of with a smaller scale project, and now we're going to get more into what the studio is working on right now. This is a project for Porcelanosa, you know, the company, they do interior finishes in Spain. And the idea is they gave me this 250 square feet space, and the idea was they asked me to design a bathroom or a kitchen or some stupid thing like this. And I said, no, I don't want to do this. I want to do a little apartment, you know, where you can actually spend your life. And I want to think about, you know, the future of living, you know, how are we going to live in the future? And they were a little hesitant because they wanted me to use all these materials. It was for a showroom in Spain, and they wanted to use all these archaic things like stone and wood. And I'm like, okay, well, let's combine a little bit the materials with this idea and try to come up with something interesting. So the space, as you can see, is very small, and there's only windows here. These are basically walls. Imagine an apartment building, your typical high-rise building. Windows only here, and then 2 walls and an entrance door. And what we designed was this sort of cube that actually won an award in Italy for industrial design, which contains all the wet functions. The shower, the toilet, the sink of the kitchen, and even the bed is actually attached to it and unfolds. And this thing is actually mounted on tracks, so you can actually move this thing in the space and then reconfigure the space for different things at different times of the day. You know, there's something that drives me crazy about space, and it's, I think in a house there's a lot of wasted space during the day. I have this obsession about the 24-hour use of space. You know, how can we reconfigure things in an easy way? And what I mean easy way is like one move, not even two, right? One move. You put something and that's it. You don't have to push and open or push and pull. Just one move and then create a different experience within a small space. So what I came up with is with this sort of space that has obviously these three walls that are cladded in that screen. I will show you. You see, this is the space. When it's about creating, that module is in the corner and the space is fairly open. When it's about lounge and work, there's surfaces that unfold from these walls where I can actually set up a table, right? When it's about cooking, you know, there's things that unfold from that cube, and then I have things that unfold from that wall, so I have additional surfaces. And actually the space that is in between the screen and the partition wall is around 1.5 feet. So this is actually the place where you store things. There's no closet here. All the storage happens in the perimeter of this space. And I was thinking that, you know, the way we store things right now, our music is in computers, our books are in computers, you know, our work is in computers. There's a lot of storage that is actually virtual. So I think we're actually moving rapidly into really needing less and less storage. So this was part of the idea of this project too. You can see the bed unfolds, you know, the cube keeps moving. These are renderings, and this is the actual built pavilion. As you can see, so this is that screen. This was actually cut with computers, obviously. It's very random. The lighting, there's really no light fixtures hanging from the space. There's no air conditioning. My goal with this space is that all the heating and cooling comes through the screen, so you're basically getting that feeling that you're surrounded by comfort, right? So there's no ducts and fancal units and crap, you know, in the ceiling. The ceiling is as tall as it can be, and everything is kind of in the sides of on the sides of the pavilion, and the lighting as well, you know. So there's no light fixtures. The lighting basically emanates from the walls, and as you unfold the surfaces, you basically create areas, you know, for, you know, engaging with the space. And obviously, I like things that do 2 or 3 things. You know, I don't like that a curtain wall is just a curtain wall that protects you from the elements. I like that the curtain wall could be a structural component. You know, in this case, for example, the screen in that, let's call it the south wall, right, unfolds, and it's also a sunshade, right? So as you close it, you're protected from the sun. As you open it, then you get some daylight in the space. So these are some details, and you can see this is the screen. This is that wet box. This is a pavilion that it took me 12 years to build. It's in Oaxaca, it's in the southern part of Mexico. We're very proud of this building because we actually built it with local labor, and there's not a lot of technology there. There's really not a lot of resources. It's a very conservative environment as well. You know, I was almost lynched by the community when I proposed this thing there, because everything there is like 16th century and 17th century and whatever. These walls are 17th century, and so they basically told me, your building is going to be in the most invisible corner of the whole complex, and it shouldn't be taller than this wall because we don't want anybody to see it from the street. So I said, that's fine. But at the end, it's interesting because the whole story really transformed. The building has been embraced by the community. They call it now the Educational Pavilion. They get more than 50,000 visitors a year. And it's not because of these old walls, obviously, right? It's because of the building. And the reason is because this is a machine for plants. You know, what we're doing here is we're actually, when I reflect about this building, I think it's really a metaphor of the fragility of our life. You know, what this building really shows us is that it takes a lot of effort and care to make things grow and to keep them alive. We're planting things here, and of course the temperature of these 2 chambers, the building has 2 chambers, east and west, they have to be perfectly controlled in terms of humidity and temperature for things to really be able to exist and to flourish. So the idea of the building is obviously with minimal means of technology to achieve, you know, this sort of comfort that is needed for this. And obviously I didn't want to have air conditioning units floating there and dogs and things like this, you know. There's something in my work, I call it invisible systems, where I really think a lot about these things. And it's not that I want to hide them. I'm trying to think of a different way to achieve the same result. So what I did is, you see, these are some of the sketches. I'm really old school. I still sketch a lot. This is the way I think. You know, these were some of the first drawings. There was this idea of having that sort of stair that gets you to the top of the building, and then you can enjoy the view of the whole content, which is quite beautiful. You see, these are one of the first drawings, and these are these two chambers. This stair has also two purposes. You know, it's basically means to get up in the second floor, but it's also a collector for water. So as it rains, these two surfaces bring the water to that central piece. We have a cistern there where we collect the water, and we use that water for evaporative cooling to basically water the plants and to lower the temperature of the chambers in the pavilion. Some of the details of the building, you can see this is what happens when you go up there. You have this platform, you go around, and then you can look down and look into these plants and whatever. I found very interesting that somehow the building, I'm a maniac of glass, you know, so I really like to look into glass technology, and we look into the performance charts, and we work with manufacturers. I wanted to get the most transparent glass possible, because of course we need the most light for these plants to grow, and it's incredible what happens through the day, you know, in terms of daylight. The building really transforms. There are moments that it completely goes away, and it starts reflecting what is around it, and there's moments that it's actually more reflective. Now, going back to the idea of technology and comfort, you don't see it here, but the wall that is casting a shadow here, there's actually an air intake. This is the coolest wall in that area. So basically what I'm doing is I'm taking the air that is around me, which is hot, obviously, but it's not as hot because it's on the north side. And then I have a turbine here, buried. And then I have a lot of piping, you know, really hundreds and hundreds of meters of piping around the building that are buried 10 meters below ground. As you know, the temperature of Earth below a certain level is the same anywhere in the world. So what we're doing is we're actually cooling naturally the air that is around us, and we're pushing that air at 20 degrees centigrade, which is around 70 degrees Fahrenheit, in these chambers. We seemed like an impossible dream when we were working on this in the beginning. They told me that I was crazy, it was not going to work, that we're going to need additional air conditioning, and in actuality, when the temperature outside of this pavilion is, 85, 90 degrees, we're actually able to bring air at 20 degrees, again, 72 degrees centigrade from the chambers, and this is how we keep, these plants healthy and growing. Some of the details you can see, I like to do things like this, that this mullion is also supporting the railing of the stair. I mean, I really try to get into using less and less materials in the work that I do, because of course everything is close. This is the context, so you get a feeling of the area. You see, very conservative. This is the main plaza of this phenomenal Baroque church from the 17th century. So I mean, I understand why they didn't want the spaceship too close to them, but in a certain way, right now, it's really resonating and it's making more and more sense. You see, these are the solar panels that I put in the administrative building that are actually powering the turbine of the building and the evaporative cooling system. This is more of a close-up of the building, you see. They really put me in the corner. But it's actually quite nice, as people walk here, they get a phenomenal sort of experience, because the biodiversity of this area of Mexico is really phenomenal. They have like 800 cactuses in these botanical gardens. It's quite rich and diverse. You see, this is actually the mechanical room of the turbine right here. And again, well, this is a proposal for a mosque in Dubai. There's a Santiago Calatrava tower here. For me, obviously, it was important to react to these two axes. There's the axis of the master plan, there's the axis to Mecca, which is always important when you're designing a mosque. And I've been calling this building the open mosque, because it's a little bit like the pavilion in Oaxaca. It's a very open building, very connected. It transforms, as things happen around it. Probably the most significant aspect of this building is the site has a significant slope. So we're basically sloping the whole building. It's a series of steps, and what that creates, which is very interesting, is it's giving us the perfect scale for praying. As you know, in this culture, defining your area of praying is quite important. So we're doing that with the architecture. Obviously, there's a separation between women's prayer room and then the men's prayer room, so the entrance is divided. You enter the building from sort of this fountain, and then as you start walking, the building is actually, the boundaries between public and private space are really blurred in this building. You know, you almost don't know exactly where one begins and the other one ends. The building has very simple components that sort of stepped floor, these rotating screens. The building is so round, it's huge. This is a mosque for 4,000 people, expandable to 6,000 people. So the whole perimeter of the mosque is surrounded by these huge metal screens that basically rotate. And when there's no prayer, they're open, so people can come in, tourists, whatever, and when there's prayer, they close, and then the building is giving you a signal that, you know, something is happening inside. So you can see this is the section of the building. It's basically 3 components, right? The screens, the roof, the minaret, and that sort of slope platform. We're hoping to hear good news from this. It's basically, the building is supported by very thin columns around it, so these actually screens, they don't really get all the way to the top. The idea is that you really feel connected to the outside environment. These are some of the renderings. So there's a lot of public spaces around the building, areas for children, areas for education, for meditation. This is a prayer room, and this is the women's prayer room looking kind of towards the entrance. This is kind of my technology sheet, you know. I was thinking a lot how to cool the space, how to really create a cool chamber, make this really possible in that climate. I work in that climate, so we know what it takes, and we're using some similar ideas of geothermal and, you know, high performance glazing. The minaret, by the way, I have a series of turbines here that the idea is that they're actually driving the hot air that is basically rising from the main prayer room, and then exhausting it through the minaret into the. This is a bridge that also I submitted in one job. We're still awaiting a result. It's a 2-kilometer bridge. This is the first building that I did in China that I showed you in the beginning, Litop Tower. This is a proposal. We call this the Harmony Bridge. It's a 2-kilometer link between the 2 sides of the city. And what is interesting about this bridge is really not about connecting 2 points. It's really about what happens in that trajectory, right? And how we bring people closer to the city, to the water, you know, to moments of introspection, and not so much just get me to the other side. And what was very important for me was this idea of the relationship between people and cars. You know, I thought that was really harsh. You know, people walking next to cars all the time, over 2 kilometers. That seems really crazy. So I was really manipulating a lot. That surface, you know, is undulating. You know, it goes up and down, sometimes really much higher than cars, sometimes much lower. And what is actually quite interesting is I'm taking the energy of the cars. I was working with Aru on this. I had this idea of taking the vibration of the cars and through springs and other things, you know, making these ribs vibrate. So as they vibrate, because the tips have different lengths, they vibrate in different frequencies. And I have, like imagine a stick, a drumstick in the top of these things, and when the springs vibrate, this thing actually hits the wood slats, and then it creates a percussive sound. So this is from where it's called the Harmony Bridge. You know, as you're going across, you're getting all this sound, which starts blending. It's almost like white noise to the sound of the cars, and makes your journey more interesting. Some of the diagrams, you can see the relationship to the cars. These are those ribs. And then I was working with a lighting designer from France. We've been friends for many years, and he's quite wonderful. And we were thinking of shooting, you know, videos of the river and then projecting that on the edge of this bridge. So as you're approaching the bridge from the distance, without looking down at the river, you see the river. You know, so the building sort of blends with its environment. This was a phenomenal. You know, architects, we tend to always talk about me, and I, and what I did. But frankly spoken, there's no good buildings without collaboration. You know, I invited a lot of people to work with me in this project because I always felt that this was going to give us the best result. And so we worked with obviously graphic artists, animation artists to tell the story, but also I invited a composer, you know, to compose. I'm a musician, so I had this idea, you know, what the music would be for this kind of architecture. So he composed a piece, and what was very interesting at the end is that this very organic shape that you see on the 2 walls of the bridge is actually a pentatonic in Chinese music. You know, it's not some kind of shape that just looks interesting. It really comes from, you know, graphicating sound, you know, and then making that sound obviously with the use of digital tools such as Grasshopper. You see, this wave that you see here is actually a sound, you know, it's a harmony. So it was really kind of amazing. I mean, we had acoustic consultants, structural engineers, again, musicians, landscape architects, lighting consultants. It was a phenomenal sort of collaboration. We're hoping that they will make a decision and we can build this thing. There is this sort of island in the middle where we have a connection to, and we're actually doing a lot of interesting interventions to that part. So the park is also sort of part of the experience of the bridge. So, okay, enough. This is my entry. This was a tough project to lose, I have to say. This was my entry for Mexico City Airport, the one that Norman Foster and Fernando Romero are building right now. I came in second place. I've done quite a few airports, so I was feeling really quite strong about this. And of course, I know Mexico, I know the soil, I know the conditions. This is a very complex soil, you know, it's very weak. Mexico was a lake, you know, so you know, you need a very special foundation concept, and of course, a building that responds to it has to be designed in a very sensible way. So my proposal was to use a membrane and a building that is very sort of modular, right, very systematic, you know, built out of an umbrella that you basically multiply many times. And this thing is actually 1 kilometer long. I mean, this thing is huge, right? So it's a big terminal. Would be one of the biggest airports in the world. As we know right now, there's a big controversy. There's a referendum. The government doesn't know what to do. They're going to finish the Foster building or not. There's big trouble. I don't think they will ever go back to beat this again. But part of the reason is because, of course, there's a lot of resources that have been invested and not very wisely in this project. I don't think really has anything to do with the architects. I think the architects have done a great job, but I just think that the city really didn't plan for enough infrastructure for this building to be there. In terms of scale, you know, this is the scale of the building. As you see, this is Estadio Azteca, this is Zócalo, for you familiar with Mexico. This is the largest stadium in the world, the largest plaza in the world. This was the size of the building, so it was pretty significant. This was the master plan, I think, you know, somehow very Mexican. You know, we started to see this sort of geometric, you know, relationships to Hispanic iconography. I like modular things. You know, I always when I start designing complex things, I like to start with a unit, you know, and then sort of multiply the unit into a more complex being. So when I started with this building, yes, I was thinking a lot about the big shape, but I was always thinking on how to build a big shape in an efficient way. So the idea was to have this umbrella that has integrated lighting, that collects water, that produces energy, that becomes a structural element, and so as you connect these things, they can easily be braced, and then the building becomes structurally very sound. And with a very simple move, which means really by cutting the length of the column, you know, you can actually slope this building and make it much more topographic as the building becomes narrower. It's actually much lower as it approaches the ground. You know, in airports, there's always the land side and the air side. You know, that's kind of airport language. So the air side is always, you know, your secure areas and your airplanes are, and the land side is really your checking, your security, your immigration. So the idea is the land side is really more connected to the ground, and obviously the air side is actually more connected to the sky. These are some of the views. I mean, it was pretty light building, I think a lot of the materials and the culture of nature in buildings in Mexico was really part of the proposal. Passive systems for heating and cooling, you know, the idea of making this building really efficient and comfortable with minimum use of resources was very important for me. You can see these are some of the statistics of this building. Obviously, we're architects and we're very optimistic about these things, especially when we're presenting to clients. You know, at the end, things really change. You know, I remember when we designed this building in Germany, we said that we're going to save 65% energy, and the papers were really excited about the thing, and at the end it was more like 70, you know. And then when we built it, we were actually surprised that we went back to 50%, you know. So it was really, we have to always be careful about these numbers, and it's always great to have a team working with you. But of course, I mean, in projects like this is important, because obviously there are big buildings that use a lot of energy and resources. This is a master plan that we were working on in Shenzhen. It's one of the, I think, the biggest master plans that I've done. It's literally a city, you know, there's a lot of buildings, office, retail. The architecture here wasn't really so important. It was more about creating a system that works for them, you know, something systematic, creating a place. These are some of my drawings, you know, this is how I start really giving scale, and I love, in projects like this, you realize how important negative space is, really as important as positive space, you know, as built space, you know. Sometimes it's even harder to program what happens here than to program what happens inside of the building. I tend to really start thinking a lot about structure and systems as I'm designing things like this, you know. I don't really, and of course things start growing and developing, and we start seeing the potential of this. I mean, this was immense. The scale was, I've never really worked on such a big master plan, you know, for one client. Unfortunately, we were not selected. We came in second place as well, which is worse than being last. It always hurts more. But you learn a lot in these things. Of course, in China especially, this idea of how you connect building to a certain concept, and it's very important. We discovered that the official flower of that town is the bougainvillea. So we you know, sort of start using that as a reference for the basic party of the building, how things are configured. And I don't think I'm going to show you the animation because it's quite boring. So this is actually a project in the Middle East. It's in Riyadh. Very ambitious. The client wanted to do this big shopping mall and these towers. When they sent me the first proposal of the master plan, each one of these buildings was very different. And it didn't really make sense to me. It was really looking like a collection of bad buildings, you know, a little bit like what has happened in Dubai. You know, I think Dubai is really not a good place. You know, there's a lot of bad buildings, one next to each other. So I told them, I think we need to find a way to create a cohesive story, you know, and give this thing an identity. As you approach this thing, you have tall buildings there. How can we make this thing relevant, you know, at the entrance of this town? So what was interesting is that each one of these towers had a different program, obviously, you know. They're quite eccentric there, you know, so they have hotels that are 5 stars, 7 stars, 11 stars, or whatever, you know. It's not that I've never really been. So we said, okay, so let's make that eccentric piece, that, you know, and then this was a condominium with amenities. This was office, but with different products, so it was kind of interesting, you know, to have it. And then this was a business hotel with, you know, more service suites and condominiums. So that actually helped us to sort of break down the party horizontally, right, and create sort of a unified image. Obviously, the climate is quite harsh, you know, you get the sandstorms, so the skin of these buildings was quite important, you know, as part of the whole idea. And of course, that helped also to unify sort of the language of the whole project. You can see, and the reason for the rotation was really not so arbitrary, you know. What I did is, the first rotation was in relationship to the city grid, the second rotation is Mecca, the third rotation is to the north, and then the top in this particular case was just looking for the best views in town, you know. So in a certain way, which here was really hard because it's the desert, right? So, and it becomes really subjective, but we always try to connect things with things that are rational, you know, because when we present to clients, it really resonates more, you know. I think, at least that's what I believe. Obviously, the normal challenges of how to solve a core and the structure of the building when the building twists were kind of interesting, and you can see this is that sort of shade screen that is protecting us from obviously excessive sun heat gain and the storm and the sunstorms. This is really probably the project that I'm the proudest right now. It's the stadium, the baseball stadium in Mexico City. It was interesting for me to get this opportunity because there's a very, very famous firm that you all know, I'm not going to say the name, that they're experts in stadium facilities. you know, and they were working with this client, and the client was very concerned because they were just not understanding that these things in Mexico, you know, and as good as they are in designing these facilities, the building for the client was important that it really relates to the context, and it's a complex context because there's this is one of the toughest areas in the city, you know. It's actually poor and a little violent, and then in contrast we have Formula One, you know, boy, you know, and then there's the Felix Candela building, which is pretty significant in the context, you know, the Palacio de los Deportes. So there was a very industrial area around me, the airport, a very sort of also segregated and eclectic sort of housing complex here. So the context was really interesting. So when this client approached me, I said, look, you have to talk to these guys first and tell them that you want me to do a proposal, because it's just not ethical that I just jump in. If they accept to stop working and you tell them that you're going to get a second proposal from me, I'm willing to work on this with you. So he did that, and then we engaged. This is the building. You know, it was a very interesting conversation. When I was trying to get the job, he said, have you done a stadium? I said, no. Do you like baseball? No. So, what are you doing here? Well, you know, I think this is the kind of problems where I can be very successful, I told him, because I'm really not going to come here with preconceptions, either of the sport or of the building typology. I'm really going to think about it, you know, and just really acknowledge that this is actually the problem working with the experts, you know. They became too expert in this thing that they were just not really thinking about this anymore, you know. I'm really going to think about it. So he said, what do you need? I said, already nothing, anything, just give me 2 months, let me think about what I want to do, and if I come up with something significant, I'll give you a call. So after a couple of hours, I was sketching, and I really thought I had it. I sent him the sketches, and he said, I like it. This was the same day of the call, and I said, well, give me 2 months, and I will come and present. So as I was unpacking the model, I will never forget, his wife approached me, and I was taking things out, and there was a lot of conversations in the room at that place, and she approached me and said, you've done this pavilion in Mexico? Yeah, whatever. And then she said, oh, I was there, I got the ribbon, oh, wonderful. So then she looked at the building and said, so when do we start? And then I looked at her and said, the meeting. And she said, no, the construction. So it was amazing, really. I mean, I think in an hour and a half, you know, we got the job, and we're building it, as you can see. This sort of trapezoids. I wanted to do something obviously Mexican. This is where all the concessions, the offices, administrative, you know, clubhouse, you know, the team is located, and then it's a very open building. This was the first section that I built. I didn't want to have any columns, obviously, in front of the seating, so the building has a significant cantilever. This is around 72 meters, and it's a very interesting structure. These 6 columns with a king post, and then these 2 things that basically grab it from the back. It's similar to what I did in Tokyo. I wanted this sort of fabric to be very clean and flat, not curvy, you know, and very, very clean shapes. And obviously, I was always exploring this contrast between what we call in pre-Hispanic culture the inframundo, which is the world of the dead, you know, which is about stone and connection with, you know, the earth, and heaven, which is really about being, you know, light and airy and technology, and, you know. So this is kind of the datum where these 2 things meet, right? So this is very technological, and this is also very technological in the way that it's built, but it doesn't look that way, you know. This almost looks like, really, it has that feeling of pre-Hispanic architecture, but very technically crafted, you know. So this is, it's been phenomenal. This is my contractor for the facade. I'm here with him. It was amazing, an amazing achievement. The facade came on budget, really, and with the quality and the control that I wanted. Each one of these panels weighs 650 tons. They're immense, really, they're immense. I'll show you a picture. The spaces, the public spaces are phenomenal. I like systematic things, you know, that by removing a couple of these things, I create a concession, or a window, or a door, right? I'm also always very interested in how systems work together. You know, I didn't want a building that is all concrete and steel, you know. I mean, there's all these sort of moments where the building is very solid and then it transitions into this sort of steely quality, into a prefabricated structure, into a membrane. You know, I like to, this is one of the first models that we built. So then, here I am again, when I was still happy, and what I mean by that is the building was still on budget. And we rented this crane. There's only 7 in the world. This is one of them. This thing can lift 3,000 tons at once, like this. Obviously, when the arm extends, it's obviously much less, right? So we needed to bring this monstrosity to be able to lift these roof panels. As you can see, each one of these weights is 25 tons. This is a counterweight of the crane. And so it was really a heavy operation. This freaking thing was costing us, that's what I tell you, that I was happy still because the crane was just arriving. The crane came in 50 semi-trucks. It takes 3 weeks to assemble it, and it costs $30,000 a day to rent it. The crane spent 1 year on the construction. So our architects and the budget. So here it is, you know, this is the day that we lifted the first module. It was really like a dream. We tried to do this a couple of times. I haven't told you the biggest story of failure in this project. Before the crane came, we built a platform here. It was almost like it was a long platform, right? And we had to do this because obviously you wouldn't believe the contractual relationship with the owner of the crane. I mean, these guys wouldn't lift a bottle of water if the crane is not insured, and if you don't pay for all these things. Negotiating the crane was really quite a task, you know. Insurance plus insurance plus insurance. So when the damn crane came, you know, we were actually ready to do testing, you know, just driving the crane over the platform. And some really brilliant engineer in Mexico said, oh, you know, we really don't need piles for this platform. You know, I mean, this crane, I mean, the distributed load is really not that much. And I said, yeah, but there's the loss of the roof. And they came, yeah, no, everything is considered, don't worry about it. Okay, great. So then this thing came and it started moving like this, you see, on the platform. And guess what? On the second pass, the slab, it was a slab that was probably this thick, reinforced steel. It cracked like a cracker. I mean, really, I mean, it was broken in 3 pieces, okay, and we were in disbelief when we were desperate. I laugh right now, back then we were just going crazy. So we had to, obviously that guy was fired. And then we had to bring a demolition crew, take down, you know, an immense amount of cubic meters, delay the project 3 months, rebuild that slab with piles. So we had to spend another $2 million, you know, to make that happen. And finally, the crane, came back. We put it together again, and this is the day when we lifted that model. It was unbelievable. I was really, you know, literally in tears. It was really such a great day when we saw this thing flying. It looked so fragile, you know, so light. It was looking really kind of impossible. And then it looks easy, you know, as it's approaching the pyramids, it looks like, oh my God, now we're there, but we weren't, you know. You have to really make all these things coincide. The angle, as the crane is traveling, you know, the angle of the roof has to be perfect. We had to lift that roof. Before we were able to lift it, we spent 4 hours putting weights around this damn thing to put it in the right position in the air, because it was not exactly flat. It's a little bit like this and a little bit like that, right? So we were, with digital topography, we were taking measurements, and we spent 4 hours really adding weight to the perimeter of this canopy, so as it comes here, it really is positioned in the perfect place, and we did. This was really a day of joy. You see now the building is progressing. These are pictures from a couple of days ago. We're finishing in February, finally. It amazes me, really. It looks like the way it was designed. It really hasn't lost anything, and that's it. This is
one building that we're working on in Monterey now is a nanotechnology building. It's a science building for Monterey Tech. It's an interesting building because it's a little bit of a mixed use. It's a scientific community, right? They're looking to create space for companies like all the ones you know, the Googles, the Siemens, so they can come here and do some, experiments in a collaborative environment. This is the main purpose of the building. The reason why the building has a second skin is because Monterey is a hot place, so we need to shade the building, significantly, and we're looking always for energy savings. It's sort of a very interesting diagram because it's very deconstructed, as we go up and down, the building has a lot of interesting relationships. You never know really if you're inside or outside of the building. It's kind of nice. Obviously, you have to be very modular, very open to give them flexibility for these lab spaces. There's a lot of machines, a lot of spaces for collaboration, open spaces, and terraces. I put a lot of emphasis in creating spaces for everyone, bridges. I really like in buildings when you really understand how the building works. I told them always, I want this building that when you see it, you understand that it's a lab. I hate buildings that you look at and say, what is this thing? It might be beautiful, but what is it? It's important to expose the pipes, to expose the circulation, to expose its function, and you do that obviously through design and the right use of materials and technology. The roof is a combination of ETFE and PTFE membranes, high performance membranes as well. We need to shade quite a bit, and we need to protect from hurricanes and whatever. I don't know why this is black, but let's play it. Hopefully it's not raining when I was little. No. I guess I was just missing something. Okay, so some of the views of the space inside is very technical. You see, I don't like decoration. I really don't. I like things that they are what they need to be, and I think this building is really a reflection of that. This is one of the first malls that we built. What you see here, this kind of spotted screen, is because some of these panels are three-dimensional, some of them are flat, so we're trying to simulate that in that model. You see all the piping is kind of running on the outside of the building. Between the two screens, the inner screen and the outer screen, there's a shaft where all the mechanical. This is, I don't think the inner, yeah, this is the clean room back here. Well, again, I sketch a lot. This is really how I start. I really don't know any other way, but I love technology. I have great guys in the office that use machines like really rock stars, and they support me to realize this vision. So obviously, this is interesting. You see, this is when you go to clients and you tell them, we need to do a second screen, and they tell you, yeah, all you want is to spend money and to be famous. No way. It's because we can save a lot of energy, right? And then, so you have to prove these things. You really, this is that idea of that second skin, which is very three-dimensional. We built a mock-up in the office. We ordered the material, the actual material, we framed it, we took it there. I have a very important meeting tomorrow actually with the board of the school, so we're making a final presentation to get into the design development phase. We have some significant budget issues. And here I'm going to run. I think this is a project that I just finished in China. I was taking photographs of bamboo gardens. I met this client. He told me that he wanted to do something Mixian, simple, but with lots of personality. So I designed this thing and we built it, and it really looks the way it was drawn. It's kind of crazy. And we managed to do this with obviously technology again. The building it's interesting, it's very urban. It's a very urban complex, you see. These are the towers. This is sort of the courtyard, right? The gardens. I kind of cladded, the buildings on the side to really create the feeling of one environment. There's elevated platforms that connect these pavilions and the towers, so you have a second level connection and a ground level connection with the whole complex. And what was actually remarkable is that we worked for many months using grasshopper to develop these facades, because I wanted really to create sort of this feeling of these photographs that I took of these bamboo gardens in China. And obviously the idea of this thing is to remove the need of shades in the building, to provide passive shading, to reduce energy consumption. This is a ceramic frame that is applied in the glass, and to give the building obviously tons of personality. It's quite remarkable when the sun, as you can see in this picture, you see, when the sun hits the surface, it becomes alive. When the sun is not there, the building looks very clean and simple, almost like if the freight is not there. So, and we did this with only 52 different panels. It was kind of amazing. We were rotating them, mirroring them, doing all kinds of tricks that with only 52 panels we can create this incredible randomness. These are really recent pictures. We just opened the building. This is another project that I have under construction in Shenzhen. This is a residential tower, this is an office tower, this is a retail complex. Very ambitious scale, the scale in China. What I wanted to do with this project is a little bit what this idea of the Middle East, to target different type of users for the tower. The tower was only 200 meters, so I didn't want to call it really a skyscraper as my client was calling it. So they fought me quite a bit when I told them that I wanted to break it down in segments, because they said, this is a skyscraper, what are you doing? And I said, no, it's really not that tall, it's only 200 meters. I think it's more interesting if we try to create communities, that each one of these blocks has its atrium, it has its public space, that even people from the ground can get on the shuttle elevators and be here, and then we can have lectures and coffees. So it's very interesting. We actually have created, there's a lot of discussion about the vertical city, and architects talk about this thing, but I would say that I succeeded here, far from that, but it's really an honest attempt to introduce really a more eclectic program and functions in each one of the segments of the buildings and bring public life, because these towers tend to be really sealed. I actually fought a lot with my clients not to put a glass wall in the atriums. I told them we should leave them open, you can save some money, and then we give the building a feeling that it's really more urban, more connected. We're still fighting that one, but anyway, it's actually, this tower is almost finished. This is being cladded right now. We built one-to-one mock-ups of everything in buildings of that scale, where I go and I inspect really all the details. I want to make sure that everything is detailed and constructed the way we design it. I'm really crazy about, the finishes on the stainless steel or metals or whatever, and the quality of the glass is too green or blue or not clear enough, or, the visible light transmitted values or the solar heat quality, whatever. All these things, you can speculate a lot in paper, but once you go and see something like this, you can actually make decisions. You see here is now the building under construction. We're still 2 years away, and this is sort of the result as it stands right now. This is the biggest project this is a project that I have to say I'm doing still in collaboration with Helmut. We designed it together, and we decided to continue working on this together. This is a big project in Shanghai. It's a financial complex. These 3 towers are really connected, as you can see with this bridge. This is a museum. There's an 800 people auditorium. It's really a corporate complex. It's really massive. I think this is the largest curtain wall job in China right now. We managed to build the most inefficient buildings in the world because we have a lot of corners and atriums, and these things are very tall. But these clients were really very interested in creating, again, a real environment, not just some extrusion, but really there's a lot of life in every floor of these buildings as you go in and out. There's platforms, there's bridges, there's gardens, there's cafes, there's a lot of stuff here that makes these towers actually very urban, even in that scale and in that height. So that's the theater. It's underground. It was a great challenge to get that approved by the Department of Life and Safety, because obviously an underground theater is not the easiest thing to do. Evacuation became a real challenge. We had the 2 largest construction curtain wall companies working with us in this building because the supply that we needed was just massive, and there was not one single contractor that could do this. Our budget was around $2 billion for this thing. It was really crazy. And this is some of the proposals that we have still, I have on the desk right now. This is a proposal for some residential towers in Kuala Lumpur. This is a proposal for a tower in Beijing. This building, we just got the award. It's a 400-meter tall tower in Nanjing and a retail complex. This is a proposal for a tower in Wuhan. As you can see, our projects in China There's a lot of demand. This is a project that unfortunately we just lost. We came in second place. Kensler took the first place, actually, with quite an elegant building, I have to say. What was very interesting about this building is that the podium was just not your typical tower podium. There was a community center, there was a bus station. And I always say that, you know, when we design these towers, we think a lot about the scheme and the scale and, you know, how they look. But I always focus a lot about in the ground. I think that if we spend more time thinking about the ground floor of the buildings, we can actually build a better city. Because this is where we're actually connecting as humans. We're not connecting here, this is just a symbol. Yeah? But this is where the life of the city happens. So I was quite excited when I saw that the bus station was part of the program. You know, all this complexity just adds to the richness of these buildings and makes them more interesting. This is one of our most recent awards. This is an administrative building from Monterrey Tech in Mexico. It was a building from the 1950s. It's a catalog building, obviously. This mural is pretty significant. It tells a very important story of, you know, the fight of being ill and being creative. And the university surprisingly allowed me to touch this building, which is almost sacred, because the building simply doesn't work. And I told them this in one of the meetings with Tecnano. I presented, and they asked for my opinion of this building, and I said, you know, I went to school there, and I got to tell you, this building is prehistoric. You know, you have to really do something about it, and I can help you. So we're actually doing a lot of an interior renovation. We're renovating the plaza. We're changing the curtain wall. We're making the building more democratic, more open. And just to finish now, I want to show you, this was sort of amazing. I designed this building in 2014. It was a really radical place, you see. This is an artificial island. It's a perfect lagoon, I'm sorry. It's a perfect circle. It's in the outskirts of Shanghai, and then there's this little island that floats right there, and they invited 10 architects from different parts of the world to make a proposal. And I did this in 2014, and just this week, it's amazing. 4 years later, they call me and they say, we have selected you and one more firm to continue working on this. We're going to resume the project. We have a new mayor, and we want to push this. And it's an interesting project. There's sort of a cultural program in the base of the building, and then this is obviously a hotel. And but what they're thinking now is that this, instead of just becoming a park, that it belongs to the building, they want to make this really part of the public, because this area, in 4 years, it has developed incredible. I mean, you see here, there was nothing. Right now, there's buildings everywhere. So this now has become a really important place. They actually made reference to, you take it the way you want, and they said Millennium Park. So they said, and I said, okay, I get it. You know, we're not going to bring a lot of things, but yeah, I think we have to be careful. But obviously, you know, it's an interesting problem because of its context. So I want to show you. This is probably a better animation if it runs. It's kind of simple. We call it Wish. And it's kind of interesting. We call it that way 4 years ago, and somehow our wish hopefully becomes kind of a reality. The building is obviously facing east-west, so that's sort of the reason for the opening. And I didn't really work with. I know what you're thinking. Don't say it. This was part of the things that they told me they want to redesign. But they actually told me that they, you know, there's a new program coming to the building. So I don't think that the building actually is going to end up being the way it looks right now. But probably the height is the height and the sort of the massing of the basic massing of the building is going to remain. I didn't compose the music mistake, please don't think of me there. You know, I have a rendering company in China doing this, and they were quite low on the range. So anyway, it's been a pleasure being with you today. Thank you so much.